We have a refugee program.
I am sure there's been violence
people
against
who are
one
getting
side of
killed.
the
There has been violence like that. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. I want to make a point. Violence does not equal genocide.
That's
so
right.
we need to be really, really clear about that. Because if you look
If you're
at the violence,
dead guy, you may not say that.
No, I would say that, actually. Because if you look at what genocide is, it is very specific that you're trying to get rid of a people, a whole group of people. There is violence in South Africa. They've had a very big uptick in violence. But black people have seen the brunt of that violence.
Okay.
Not just.
Then let me ask this question of the panel.
So the Trump administration has once again broken the brains of the left-wing media by deciding to let in refugees, about 50 or 60 of them, by the way, so a very small number of them. And the problem with these refugees, if you guys haven't figured it out, is that they're Africans. And by Africans, I mean South Africans. And by South Africans, I mean the white ones. Therefore, the mainstream media is absolutely losing their mind. They're declaring this evil white and racist. They're telling the evil orange man to stop it with the evil white racism. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because unlike many a different situation with many a different refugee, we are getting a lot of ridiculous takes from the left-wing media, because it is just decided that if you are a white person from South Africa, that you are an evil white racist and thus not worthy of admittance into the United States of America. Now, we're going to break this down. We're going to talk about this. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Well, he's put a refugee ban on practically everybody else. Most of that everybody else that I can think of are either black people or brown people. We are seeing right now Cuban mothers torn away as they are breastfeeding one-year-old U.S. citizen child and sent back to Cuba, where there is a cruel dictatorship. We are seeing Nicaraguans and Venezuelans and Haitians, where the country is held in a handbasket, and Cubans who had parole status to come into this country.
Anna, fair enough.
Told they have to leave.
Let's celebrate one thing together.
So right off the top, I just want to point out that Ana Navarro is of Cuban descent, and immediately she decides to make this particular issue about the Afrikaners, the white South African refugees entering the United States, about her specific ethnic group. And to be clear, the president that actually ended the wet foot, dry foot policy for Cuban refugees in the United States of America was in fact Barack Obama. And I'm actually not about the evil orange man not setting that back up, because in reality, Cubans have been great contributors to the United States of America. They come into this country, they are super pro-American, they absolutely hate communism. So the idea that we would be deporting people right back to that communist hellhole, I'm not exactly on board with. That being said, she ends up referencing Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, and all these other different Latin nations, and it needs to be made clear to everybody out there in the audience that these are not real, legitimate, authentic asylum seekers. These are economic migrants, and we've seen case after case after case of them clogging up the asylum system, even though they explicitly tell us they're coming to the United States of America because they want welfare benefits, because they want better economic opportunities. And while the economic situation in a place like Venezuela absolutely sucks, the fact is the asylum system is not meant to be for economic migration, and it's absolutely pathetic that we allowed these people for the whole 4 years of the Biden administration to go through multiple different countries on their way to the United States of America, only for them to suddenly claim asylum when they were back here. Obviously, if you're looking for safe harbor, you should claim asylum in the next safe country, which, by the way, brings us to the Afrikaners, who are essentially being turned away by each and every country they attempt to migrate back to. They are unwanted by these European nations to which they are descendants of. Some of them, by the way, are descendants of Europe about 400 or 500 years back. Imagine if Americans told black people in this country that they can't have full rights in this nation because they're not indigenous to the Americas, even though their ancestry goes back 400 years, a similar amount of time, and we were going to deport them back to Africa, or we expected them to deport themselves back to Africa. Obviously, nobody would tolerate that. But of course, because it's white Afrikaners, everything is completely different, because these are the most evilest of the evil people, because apartheid, and isn't apartheid bad? You hear about apartheid all the time. Oh my God, apartheid, so terrible, so evil. White people that live in South Africa can never be forgiven.
America is still the country where the persecuted want to come. period.
Oh, yes,
That's true.
And that's the
but the
American
problem
dream.
is that the
That's
white persecuted are being allowed in,
It's
and the
still
black and the
the
brown
American
are
dream.
being torn
Well, for the record,
out of their
we
families.
did allow 20 million people to come
I hear
here
it. I'm
illegally,
just-
and this is 50 people. So, I mean,
I get it.
So, of course, Scott Jennings states the obvious right here, which is we're complaining about on this panel 49 people, again, like 50 people, when we let in 20 million illegal immigrants to the United States of America. But I would say, even if you were trying to be a little bit more moderate and a little bit more generous to the left wing in that particular case, you could say that they let in more Haitians into that one town in Ohio that made all the news because of the eating the dogs, eating the cats situation. Then they let in right here by at least 10-fold and 20-fold even, and we're not complaining about that. In fact, you would be accused of evil white racism if you brought up the fact that adding like 20,000 Haitians to a town that is just 40,000 people might create some issues for the residents of that town.
I get it, right? The math doesn't math, but it doesn't mean the facts of the situation are any different. I also just want to take great issue with the thinking that they are being persecuted, that they are suffering a genocide.
Why
That
don't they
is-
leave their homes?
Because
if everything is fine, why are they fleeing?
Because
Guess
they
what?
don't
They
like-
want to come to America like a lot of people in the world.
Oh, the American
We
dream is
have-
working? Oh, no,
but
that's horrible.
But we have a system to prioritize people who really need to come here.
Well, that's a debate we can have, and we are.
no,
that
the
is- that's
American
not a
dream
debate.
is
It's still the magnet.
process that
It
we
is the
have.
process that has been set.
Well, the previous
for
administration had priorities about who
refugees.
to let in.
So again, you have Scott Jennings right here bringing logic, reason, and common sense to this particular discussion. You also get a little bit of that from Kevin O'Leary, and my favorite portion of the exchange that Kevin O'Leary got into was when he said, oh, well, you might feel differently about whether or not it's a genocide if you end up being dead, and these people are so trained to be anti-white person, anti-South African, that the woman says, no, I wouldn't feel differently if I were dead.
Violence does not equal genocide.
That's
so we
right.
need to be really, really clear about that, because if you look
If you're
at the
the
violence,
dead guy, you may not say that.
No, I would say that, actually.
Which I guess is technically true, because if you're dead, you wouldn't feel anything. But for whatever reason, this is told to us as if it's acceptable behavior. But of course, the capper, the creme de la creme of this particular segment, comes a little bit later.
Why are Afrikaners being allowed in who are white, and the Sudanese are being closed out? I'll start with you, Scott.
I don't know. I don't know if they weigh one against the other that way. I mean, I do think it's not alleged discrimination that these people are facing in South Africa. I mean, the law there absolutely allows their property to be confiscated. They are subject to racial discrimination. Some have been subject to violence from some reports that I have read. I mean, we're talking about 50-something people, and the people who seem to be angriest about this today had no problem with 20 million coming here. Some of the worst people in the world coming here, including gang members and so on and so forth. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for the folks who are outraged today after what happened to this country over the last several years, over 50-something people who are clearly being discriminated against in South Africa.
So again, Scott Jennings makes the case quite clear. He says it quite eloquently, but then we go to this particular woman who has been described by other people, aka Ryan Girdusky, as one of the most racist people on television, one of the most anti-white people on television, who in between the breaks would do nothing but crap on white men. So you can't wait for her take on this particular issue, and I promise you, it will not disappoint.
But I think it's the reasoning for this. Allison?
Okay. So if you think about the history of South Africa, it being under an apartheid system, where I think it is 80% of the population that are Black Africans only own 4% of the land. That is because they were put in shanty towns and moved into areas where they had no rights. And so 30 plus years ago, they went through the apartheid system ended, and they reformed their constitution under the great leader of Nelson Mandela.
So just to be clear, this woman is trying to maximize the victimization of the Black Africans in South Africa by trying to do a total landmass and what percentage is owned by the populations, rather than doing what percentage of the privately owned land is owned by the Black South Africans. So the number actually goes to 15%. And again, for individually owned lands for the white South Africans, it's 72%. However, this does not include that 40% of the land in South Africa is owned by companies and or by the government. So again, we're not actually getting an accurate picture from her, but of course, this is the prelude. This is the setup for her to push her racist propaganda.
And that allowed for a racial reconciliation, one that this country has yet to do. But South Africa did it, and they reformed their constitution, and part of that is that the people who are native to that land deserve their rightful land back. that is not what the Afrikaners actually want to have happen, which are the white Africans, and so who are not originally from Africa, who colonized South Africa also.
So look, one of the things that you guys need to understand is that labels like indigenous or natives are often just coded words for being anti-white, because the fact is many of the black Africans who now currently live in South Africa are not in fact the natives. They are the descendants of people who immigrated to South Africa, because guess what? The Europeans built up that nation into a first world status when they were running it, and they went there for economic opportunity. So in reality, many of the whites in South Africa actually predate many of the blacks in South Africa. And to be clear, this is not in any way, shape, or form to justify an unequal system in the law. This is just the facts and the logic. Now, there's also people who say that there were absolutely no Africans in and around this territory. I find that to be propaganda from my research, although if somebody can actually prove that, that would be interesting to see. But the fact is, the reality of the situation is that many of these white people who are considered non-native actually descend from people who go back further to this region than the supposed native black Africans that are meant to get this redistribution.
And so that is what they are saying is discrimination. Now, if the Constitution in South Africa is discriminatory, they have their checks and balances in that land, just like we do. And that is for them to, so if the Afrikaners don't actually like the land, they can leave that country.
They are. They're leaving to come here.
No, they can
These refugees are coming here.
They can actually leave and go to where their native land is, which is probably Germany.
Are you against them coming here?
Holland, probably.
Holland.
Are you
yes.
against them coming here?
I'm against the hypocrisy of this administration.
No, that's not the question. The question is, are you against them coming here?
If there was actually a genocide happening, like there is in other places in Sudan, in the Congo, I'm not opposed for Congolese and for the Sudanese to come to Africa, just like I'm not opposed to Venezuelans and South Americans coming to America if they are fleeing and looking for asylum. What I am
Just
against,
these 50 people you're against.
I am against, it's not about being against them. What I am against is that they are being given special treatment when there is not a genocide happening in South Africa, and they just don't like the law of the land.
Well,
so you know what they
there
tell
has been
people?
violence.
But there's huge.
Again, even if you buy into the idea that every single black African is the indigenous population of South Africa, and the whites, even though they came in and built the entire country, are somehow invaders or colonizers, which by the way, they did colonize. That's called building up a nation in a lot of cases, and therefore they have no right to live there. You could actually apply that same exact logic to black people in the United States of America, but nobody in this country would go for it if you said that black people whose ancestry dates back to this continent 400 years can just leave the country if they don't like racial discrimination. I think we would all understand that that would be wildly inappropriate. And right there, she weasels around the fact that they made changes to their constitution, and that kind of glosses over the main issue that the Afrikaners are facing, because originally, after Mandela ended up taking power, after they ended up getting rid of the apartheid system, the changes to their constitution did want to address the issues with land. However, they required expropriation of land from whites to come attached with compensation. And the reason for this is because we had an issue in Rhodesia, which became Zimbabwe, where they did not compensate people. It caused the economy to collapse. Good, workable farmland that was actually being taken care of by whites was handed to incompetent people that were connected to the Mugabe government for racial redistribution, and that ended up collapsing the country. Well, guess what? In 2025, a controversial change to the expropriation law ended up going into effect that allows white people to be dispossessed from their land without compensation. Now, and again, it needs to be understood for everybody who thinks, oh, well, this is a step in the right direction. Blacks need to own more land in South Africa. We need to compensate for the crimes of apartheid, that when you forego private property rights, that leads to collapse. Zimbabwe is most known for going down this path and how it led to hyperinflation, and we would see the same disaster, not just for the white Afrikaners in South Africa, but for the blacks as well, if they go down the path of the same policies. And of course, there's all the negative cultural attitudes against white people. You have that Kill the Boer song that is often sung by the third most powerful political party in the nation of South Africa. So yeah, there's a lot of different problems with that country, and one of the things that we look for when we're determining whether or not a people could be victimized, slaughtered, or actually affected by genocide is things like dispossession of property without compensation. This, by the way, is something that the Nazis did to the Jews prior to the Holocaust. Holocaust. This is something that the Turks did to the Armenians prior to the Armenian genocide. So it's not crazy for us to say, hey, you know what? If you're feeling uncomfortable because your private property rights, specifically based on your race/ethnic origin, are being taken away, then you can become a refugee to other parts of the world. But again, these are the least sympathetic potential refugees on planet Earth right now. There are not a lot of countries that are willing to take these people in. So essentially, you're in a situation where you're watching the slow steps of their rampant demonization. And by the way, they keep getting blamed for all the problems in South Africa, even though it's clearly and obviously the consequences of the new government completely mismanaging the place. And yeah, that could lead to an environment where these people are facing a genocide or are facing an ethnic cleansing campaign, and that is quite troublesome. I actually do agree that as of right now, we're not quite there yet, but the fact is, there's definitely factions within the South African government that are gaining more influence, by the way, that want to push in that direction. Now look, overall, I actually am not sure about the compatibility of Afrikaners culture with American culture. We're talking about 50 refugees, so in my opinion, it would be smart for the United States of America to try to facilitate, if they're going to be refugees, their return to their ethnic homeland, which happens to be Europe, because I think they would probably blend better there because they have all the different cultural commonalities. But yeah, as a last resort, just like I would say for other peoples that don't have any options, that's when I would open the door up to the United States of America, because again, I actually am consistent on what the refugee policy I think is ideal, but I do commend the evil orange man for actually taking a risk and pointing out that what we're watching in South Africa is a majority population scapegoating a minority population for all their different problems, passing laws that restrict the basic rights of that minority population, and of course, there are radical factions that are growing in power that are promoting using force up to the level of killing these people in this population. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about this segment and everything else down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about people getting crazy over South African refugees. Till next time.